You know, every time I get a quick break, I got so many buttons and stuff to push over here. You know, I got to monitor this and watch that clock and push this button and spin that knob and slide this fader and so forth and so on. I got so much crap to do over here. It's really hard for me sometimes to, you know, keep my attention moving in the right direction. Sometimes you'll notice it. I'll be sitting here discussing something and I'll get lost because we get towards the tail end of the clock and I start panicking. I got to do too many things. But whenever there's a break, I look at that coffee there sitting to my left. I drink this coffee every morning, and I look at it with longing, and I'm like desperate for a moment to just grab a sip of that thing. So, all right. Part of what we talk about here and what our goal is to raise your awareness about issues that many times just, pass right over you because there's such a torrent of issues that are out in front of us that affect our lives in every respect. And sometimes my job is not just to raise the issue for you, but to then give you enough firewood that we can get the fire started, and then you have to tend it after that for yourself, right? But I get it. You need a little firewood. You need a little tinder. You need a little bit of straw to get the thing going. And, I've talked about this before, and I know it's controversial because everybody looks at their religious beliefs and says mine are inviolate and everybody else's are wrong. I don't even want to argue about that. I could argue with you about it all day, but we don't have it. So let's focus on the issue that is really at hand, which is why churches have adopted a worldview that is contrary to the teachings of the Bible that they profess and to espouse. It never ceases to kill me. This studio is in a church, and most churches would have kittens if I were to do a segment like this in a church, but this pastor here at Victory, he is a down-to-earth man who is, I believe, a true man filled with the Spirit of God. And I believe that his intentions and his belief systems are in line with those of a man of our nation, while simultaneously being a man of God, and that he understands. And I got to tell you, you've heard me say it before, the shots heard around the world that kicked off the revolution in the first place were espoused and promoted and trained for by ministers. I mean, folks, the men who showed up on Lexington Green showed up after church. And guess who led them? Their minister. Led them in the physical fight. He didn't just lead them out to the field and say, all right, fellas, go at it. I'll be hiding behind that tree. He was out there with them. Compare that to your pastor. I don't know your pastor, and I don't really care who it is. And if I'm not right about yours because you know him or her to be somebody unique or different, that's fine. And this, by the way, when I say pastor, I'm talking about shepherd, okay? And I don't care whether you're a Christian. I don't care whether you're a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Catholic, whatever the heck you are. It doesn't even matter, and I don't care. What the point is that our churches have failed our nation. When we hear about things like the Department of Homeland Security's clergy response teams, where your pastor, and I've spoken to this pastor about this, did you know that if your pastor is a member of or participating in the clergy response team, he's received a commitment from the Department of Homeland Security that in the event he or she is willing to assist them in a time of national emergency, that they will have priority access to food, medical care, and security for betraying their congregation? Did you know that? No? Okay. Now you do. And so I strongly encourage you to go to your pastor or your shepherd, whomever that may be, and find out exactly what they know and what they've agreed to. Because it matters. The same way it matters if someone you find out on your staff misled you about the fact that they've been convicted and imprisoned for embezzlement. by the two previous employers, right? I mean, wouldn't you want to know that? Isn't that appropriate? Isn't it a fundamental flaw if the person who you've placed in a position of trust is misplaced? Your trust in that individual is misplaced, right? Don't you have a right to know that? And then doesn't that call into question everything else that individual has been espousing to you as your leader? Okay. There's an excellent article on CNS News. We're going to read it real quick. And this is from Jen Kuznicki. Kudos to Jen, by the way. Great article, right? CNS News, by the way, folks. If you're not utilizing CNS News, you're missing a great opportunity to see an awesome alternative media news outlet. During Mass on Easter Sunday, I cringed when the lector asked us to pray, quote, so that our generation will be the one to protect fragile earth, end quote. I'm sure most of the faithful didn't even give the comment a moment's thought. But it kind of bothers me that Christians are constantly guilted into giving money or acting upon what amounts to a belief system that does not accept God, but earth instead, as our utmost Savior and healer. The fact is, Earthday is a holy day of the religion of environmentalism. And its key proponents are some of the most rude, holier-than-thou, condescending religious zealots you will ever meet. So no, I don't want to pray that we pay money to people to invest in solar and wind power so that they can keep their level of comfort without feeling guilt from a non-existent Mother Earth. Sorry, I wasn't raised that way. And just who is sneaking in these oblique references to a pseudo-religion that worships a different God than we do at my church? How about we pray so that people can get jobs that will help with paying their bills and providing for their families? Or maybe so that the old and the infirm can find help in paying their electricity bills that have, quote, necessarily skyrocketed, end quote, because of the policies of this administration. Or take up a collection to help those on fixed incomes pay for massive heating bills from one of the coldest and harshest winters in recent memory. For those intentions, I could enthusiastically respond, Lord, hear our prayer. Nothing we do will ever be good enough for the environmental zealots because their Bible keeps changing. New science mysteriously pops up to support whatever new money-making scheme the government can bilk from taxpayers. They use government to break out their earth-saving fancy because their ideas don't work. If you use paper bags to save the environment, you're faulted for contributing to clear-cutting. If you use plastic, you're choking animal life. If you bring your own biodegradable ink and perfume-free bag, they look at whether you bought organic crap that doesn't last or what you drove to the store. They are never happy, and they will always move the goalpost. Meanwhile, the Earth and its systems are going to go ahead and do whatever it will do, regardless of our activities. A lot of people have made jokes about Earthday and the environmentalists, pointing out the hypocrisy of their actions, like Al Gore preaching in a huge arena in Hawaii powered by oil to keep it cool, and EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy using jet fuel to raise awareness rather than Skype. And while these contradictions remain ghastly, the image that the environmentally religious have, their high priests who are allowed to sin in order to raise awareness and move the goalpost, becomes quite clear. For every Christian preacher who has fallen from grace for sinning against God, there are the environmental religious who sin against the earth, according to the version before last of a reprint of their Bible, and they never suffer for it. They never do penance. They only castigate the rest of us. When you look at it that way, you begin to realize that lunatics have been very successful since the 1970s to use Christian guilt against us to steal our money and waste our time. While Americans everywhere struggle to work to provide for their families, these lunatics use the force of government to ultimately make our electricity more expensive, our gas less clean, our fields less productive, our cars less safe, our nation less great. A nation that would be at peace if these crackpots stopped forcing their religion on everyone. I'm sorry, but I take serious offense when I'm being asked to pray to heal the earth and yet leave Christianity out of politics. While these lunatic fringe earth worshippers talk down to me that I'm not doing enough to save an earth that doesn't know me for anything but future compost. I love the spin of her words. My spirituality goes much deeper than that. Kudos, by the way, to Ms. Jen Kuznicki. I think she did an excellent job on that piece, and I probably didn't do it justice in reading it. But here's my point, folks. The concept and the principle that your church would allow the discussion about the competing religion of environmentalism while standing aside when told to by government because we can't have a cross of church and state, which admittedly not only the church but also the state have completely taken out of context, is insane. It's absurd. Your church should be doing a number of things. Number one, churches are the original community organizations. Long before Barack Obama ever came on the scene, long before there was a civil rights movement, the church was the original community organization. Why? Because there's a group of people who all live in fairly close proximity and all are of similar mind and like. And so you have a bond with individuals within your community and in your church, not only in terms of your spiritual beliefs, but most often their experiences in life and the things that have molded them are relatively similar to yours. I mean, people move around the country a little bit, but for the most part, when you go to a community, those people have been there for quite some time. And, their experiences and what they see in life and in the community in which you live, in the town in which you live, and the experiences that you have made up your worldview are fairly similar. Taking the church and stripping it of its community organizing capabilities and function is antithetical to the entire process of religion. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective, I mean, even in the Bible, for crying out loud, Jesus talked about the fact that the churches should be binding together their members to work towards a communal goal. And we're not talking about, hippie communal living. We're talking about communal goals that are for the betterment of everyone in the congregation, but also in the outlying community at large. What could be more profitable? What could be more beneficial? What could be more valuable and virtuous than preserving and restoring the nation which we all see slipping away from us? And yet churches will stand there and demand they cannot do that because they are prohibited from doing so by law. Wow. First of all, that law doesn't exist, and it's up to you to educate your minister to the fact that it doesn't. Number one, there is no prohibition against church and state. The premise was that we didn't have a Church of England that was an official religion of the nation. That was the idea. It was not that churches and religious belief can not have a part or play a role in government. The idea was that you couldn't say, in order for you to be a citizen, you've got to be a member of this church. That was the intent, ladies and gentlemen. And the two have a chasm between them that cannot be bridged. You see, our founders, and contrary to the new think, some of them were deists, but contrary to the new think, the vast majority of them, and the vast majority of them, were men of religious conviction in the Christian faith. Doesn't mean that there were atheists among them. But I got to tell you, they all lived by the moral principles of the day that came from the religious background, if you will. And even those who didn't necessarily practice religion or believe in it, even if you take the atheists into account, they all had a common goal, which is something that today we don't have. In other words, all of these men looked upon the common goal of let's unite the country and create a framework where government serves us versus the other way around for the first time in history. And irrespective of all their other issues and religious beliefs, irrespective of their political ideations, irrespective of their racial likes or dislikes, irrespective of their sexual preferences, they all had one goal in mind. And they all kept their eye on the prize. All of them. Now, was there argument? Of course there was. But you see, the goal was bigger. The goal was greater than the sum of its parts. And they were willing to put aside their differences and maybe even believe that they may be wrong in their beliefs and that their bias was, inappropriately arrived upon or adopted. There are examples where the founders have actually written, and I'd have to find them. I guess I should have pulled them out in advance, but where they admit, perhaps I've been looking at this from the wrong perspective. When was the last time you heard anyone in a political arena say that publicly? I know, crickets, right? Why? I mean, the last change of heart we saw by a politician was Barack Obama changing his position on gay marriage, which everybody knew he already had in the first place. He was just unwilling to admit because he was running for office, which is a little bit different than truly changing your perspective on something. I mean, the argument's out there that Obama's, bisexual anyway, and whether or not you agree or disagree, I don't care. It doesn't even make any difference. The point is, that's about the only admission we've ever seen from a politician who says, maybe everything maybe these things that I've built my convictions upon, my belief convictions upon, were, maybe the rocks weren't quite as squared off as I thought and my foundations skewed. Hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. There is literally nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the mark of a critical thinker. And so I encourage you, I challenge you, and I challenge your minister to be a critical thinker and begin to discern, one, is my often held belief that there is a separation between church and state and the concept of politics has got to be off limits in my church, right or wrong? And for what reason? Number two, is my tax exemption, which I cherish and is my precious, worthy of the betrayal of my flock? I am, after all, their shepherd. And my job as a shepherd is to protect that flock, even when I endanger my life to go physically fight back the wolf. And there, ladies and gentlemen, lies the problem. If your pastor is not willing to put aside and set aside that or risk that 501c3 precious because he or she is afraid that, in fact, it may be taken from them for the free speech and for the true leadership that they should be exhibiting, then you should run from them like you would run from an Ebola plague victim. And furthermore, you shouldn't just run from them. What you should be doing is racing away from them, and while you're there, before you leave, making sure that you alert everyone else in the congregation precisely why you have to leave. Make a point of it. In other words, each of you should be sitting down and having a one-on-one conversation with your pastor. Call him or her up and say, I'd like to have an hour's discussion with you. And bring some material with you that will help you to establish your points. Where can you find that information? There are tons and tons of it out there. We provide a lot of it every day. But to be more specific about it, find information and put together an argument, including points from this particular discussion, that express the fact that our founders did not intend for there to be a separation of church and state where churches were prohibited from even speaking of politics. And make sure you make it clear that if they are a member of the Department of Homeland Security's clergy response team, that's a betrayal, and you need them to cast off their sin. In other words, they have to be willing to not only cast it off, but swear off the possibility that they will again fall back out of grace. Am I making my point here? It's not enough that they just say, yes, I'm a member of the DHS clergy response team, and I think you're right. After the way you've presented it and the information you've given me, I can no longer be a part of that. What they need to do is have a sermon on a Sunday that said, I had a meeting with a congregant who educated me and informed me about something which I was not really fully cognizant of prior. And as a result, we're going to have a discussion as a congregation about it. You see, if you are unwilling as a pastor to be honest with your congregation about these things which affect their very lives, while you're simultaneously pretending to be saving their souls on another plateau or another level, but you're ignoring, look, you can sit there and you can preach all you want to people, but if they're starving to death, you just don't have the same level of impact or relevance. And it's no different if they're being persecuted and oppressed or stripped of their property and their land and their savings and their children's future. That's just as critical as every other aspect. And honestly, if you're going to sit there and say to your parishioners, we expect you to tithe and to support this church, then you better be helping them have the wherewithal to accomplish that goal. All right, I'm going to lay off the church thing. But I got to tell you, the 501c3 in a religious organization is the death knell of honesty in religious America. And I don't care what your religion is. That's the truth. It is being used as a bludgeon to keep your pastor, minister, priest, imam, whatever, silent. And that's the truth. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to read some local commercials. When we come back, we're going to tackle our third topic. We're ignoring the threat of China at our national peril. It's an important topic, folks. Don't miss it. You're listening to America's Voice Now. We'll be back in just a moment. You can communicate with me directly by writing to me at mike@americasvoicenow.org.